I was not born brave. I learned it in grocery aisles and parking lots and fluorescent-lit break rooms where the clock moved like cold molasses. When Ethan's father left, I folded the hurt into a dish towel and kept moving. The apartment we rented then was thin-walled and stubbornly drafty, the kind of place where winter made you brace before stepping out of bed. I worked mornings at the bakery. My clothes smelled like cinnamon sugar until the scent settled into the curtains. Then afternoons at a pharmacy, counting pills with a plastic spatula and a prayer. Nights I cleaned offices after everyone important had driven home. I learned how to let the vacuum hum over my doubts while I pictured Ethan sleeping, his mouth open, his hair a little damp against the pillow. I taped overdue notices to the fridge, not as warnings, but as trophies. Proof that each red stamp was something I could wrestle down and win if I stayed awake a little longer. I learned to stretch chicken into soup and soup into stories, telling him about the constellations we couldn't see from our street but could still name. On weekends, I mended other people's clothes for cash. I stitched hems by the bathroom window because the light fell cleanest there. I kept a coffee can in the pantry labeled college, dropping quarters like seeds. When I was too tired to think, I recited to myself the arithmetic of love. Lunch packed, permission slip signed, shoes tied, cheek kissed, lights out, alarm set, and somehow, somewhere, my own heart held together with safety pins and hope. Ethan was my bright fact in a world that often preferred shadows. He read early, laughed easily, and argued like a tiny attorney when I tried to skip the bedtime chapter to do laundry. On the day I taught him to ride a bike, he insisted on choosing the sidewalk with the most cracks for practice, he said. And when he finally wobbled into a sure glide, he looked back, triumphant, and shouted, "You can let go now, Mom!" I didn't. Not then, not really, even when my hand had already left the seat. We built our little life out of rituals that didn't cost much. Sunday pancakes shaped like comets, library day on Thursdays, a rule about always watching the first snowfall from the same window, holding our breath like it might notice us noticing. He grew, and the world pressed in. There were science fairs and scraped knees, and the time he broke his wrist falling from a tree he'd promised not to climb. I slept in an uncomfortable hospital chair and discovered that love could be both a blanket and a blade. In high school, he hung medals from his bookshelf, and once he taped a C+ geometry test to the fridge because he'd studied until midnight and wanted to remember effort as something worth displaying. When a guidance counselor asked about money for college, I smiled with a mouth that hid my fear and let the coffee cans rattle answer for me. The day we moved him into his dorm, the RA handed him a key and handed me back my breath in pieces. Still, we called each Sunday. He described messy roommates and professors who loved tangents, and I told him what was blooming in my small yard, how the azaleas leaned toward the morning. When he graduated, I wore a dress that had waited in the back of my closet for that exact afternoon, and when they said his name over the loudspeakers, I clapped like thunder. Then he met Melissa. I brought a lemon pound cake to the first dinner because I was raised to arrive with something sweet. She had a clean house and a smooth way of speaking that made me sit up straighter. She took Ethan's arm when she laughed, a light touch that said possession more than affection, though I tried not to notice. I told myself new love can be clumsy. People adjust. At their wedding, someone moved my place card from the front row to the second to accommodate Melissa's grandmother, and I smiled until my cheeks ached. In the photos, you can't tell that my hands were cold. After they returned from the honeymoon, I learned to text before calling to ask, "Is this a good time?" Like my voice needed a reservation. Holidays grew complicated in the way holidays do when new branches get grafted onto old trees. I offered to make my stuffing. Melissa preferred a lighter recipe. I brought handmade ornaments. She curated a palette for the tree. I told Ethan his wife had a good eye and watched the words leave my mouth like birds flying in the wrong season. When plans shifted, I shifted with them. "We're doing Thanksgiving with her family this year, Mom, but the weekend after is wide open." Wide open often narrowed to a sliver at the last minute. Parking fiascos, rain checks, the word reschedule taking up permanent residence in my calendar. I learned new arithmetic. 2 becomes 3. And sometimes 3 means the original 2 must stand a little farther apart to make room. I tried to be graceful. I sent birthday cards early and kept my opinions folded inside silence. When I did visit, I took off my shoes without being asked and wiped the sink after rinsing my teacup. I noticed the brand of olive oil on their counter and bought the same for my kitchen, as if taste could be a bridge. With every adjustment, I told myself what mothers have told themselves for centuries. Let him have the life he's choosing. Love is not a rope. I did not know then how easily a rope can be disguised as ribbon, how let go could be twisted into get gone. But in those early years, I held my smile the way a seam holds a dress. Quiet, necessary, almost invisible. And I kept bringing cake, just in case sweetness could teach a room how to be kind. The lilies lay in a neat glass vase, their white petals curling toward the afternoon light. I'd spent the morning trimming them carefully, thinking of how Ethan always loved their scent. I was going to take them to the hospital later, maybe brighten his room a little. He'd been stable yesterday, the doctors said. There was time. My hand still smelled faintly of the stems when the phone rang. Clara. Melissa's voice, flat, stripped of all warmth, cut into my thoughts. I wanted to let you know Ethan's funeral was last week. Small ceremony. Just close friends. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The world seemed to tilt as I gripped the counter. Funeral? That's not possible. The doctor said he passed 2 days ago. Complications. We thought it best to keep it small, more manageable. Her words were clinical, like she was discussing an event from the evening news. The lilies slipped from my hand, landing on the floor with a muted thud. Why didn't you call me? My voice broke. I tried. You didn't answer. I snatched my phone from the counter, scrolling through missed calls. Nothing. No messages. No hospital updates. Melissa, there's nothing here. Maybe your phone was off. Either way, it's done now. I'll send you a copy of the program if you want. She was already moving on to other tasks, her voice muffled by the sound of drawers opening and closing. The call ended before I could find more words. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the quiet, the lilies at my feet, and a hole in my chest so deep I could feel the air rushing through it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I had imagined being at Ethan's side, holding his hand, telling him I loved him as he slipped away, not hearing the news from a woman who'd never truly let me in. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat by the window, the street lamps casting long shadows on the walls, and let my mind drift backward. When Ethan's father left, it had been just the two of us. I worked double shifts, cleaning houses by day, waiting tables by night, so my boy could have what other kids took for granted: shoes without holes, school trips he wouldn't have to skip, a second-hand guitar he'd begged for at 12, his face glowing when I placed it in his hands. He was my pride, my joy, my reason, and we were inseparable. Movie nights with popcorn on the couch, long walks through the park where he'd tell me about his dreams. I'd promised myself he'd never feel the absence of a father, not while I was breathing. Then came Melissa. Pretty, polished, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first, I told myself I was being protective, maybe even unfair. I made an effort. Compliments on her cooking, offers to help with the wedding. But there were small moments that pricked at me. A text I sent Ethan about coming over for Sunday lunch. No reply. Later, Melissa told me she'd forgotten to pass on the message. A birthday card I left in their mailbox that never made it to his hands. A Christmas invitation rescinded because plans had changed. At the time, I brushed it off. Life was busy. People forgot things. But as the months passed, I noticed I was seeing my son less and less. Calls went unanswered. Visits were postponed. And when I did see him, there was always a slight distance in his eyes, like he was looking at me from across a widening gap. Now, standing in the kitchen with the lilies limp on the floor, the pieces began to edge toward each other. This wasn't just bad luck or mismatched schedules. This was something else, something deliberate. I picked up the flowers, their scent no longer sweet, but heavy, almost cloying. My hands trembled as I trimmed the stems again, this time with no intention of delivering them. Instead, I placed them back in the vase and set them on the table. A silent vigil for the son I'd been shut out from in life, and now, even in death. Somewhere deep inside, a thought I didn't want to face began to take shape. Maybe Melissa had been keeping me from him all along. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the untouched lilies between us like a silent witness. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. I stared at the phone, my thumb hovering over Melissa's name. The last conversation we'd had still rang in my ears, but I needed answers. I needed to hear her say it again, to make sure it wasn't some bizarre nightmare. When she answered, her tone was the same clipped edge as before. "Melissa, I don't understand," I began, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. "Why wasn't I told? Why didn't anyone call me when Ethan passed?" "I already explained this," she said, as if she were repeating herself to a stubborn child. "I tried calling. You didn't answer." "That's impossible." "I keep my phone with me, Melissa. I have no missed calls, no voicemails, no texts from you or anyone else." There was a pause, short but loaded. "Well, maybe your phone was off. Technology isn't perfect." She gave a little laugh that didn't belong in a conversation about my son's death. "Melissa," I said slowly, gripping the edge of the table, "you buried my son without me." Her reply was like ice water. The ceremony was for close family and friends, people who were part of Ethan's life every day. I didn't think, well, given the last few years, I wasn't sure you'd want to be there. My chest tightened. I'm his mother. Of course I wanted to be there. How could you even? It would have been too emotional, too complicated, she interrupted, her voice firm, final. Ethan wouldn't have wanted a scene at his funeral. A scene. She made it sound as though my grief would be a disruption, as if mourning my only child would be some kind of performance. My mind reeled, searching for something to anchor me, but all I found was the coldness in her voice. "You don't have the right to decide that," I said, my words sharper now. "You don't get to tell me whether I can say goodbye to my own son." "I was his wife," she shot back. "And frankly, Clara, you weren't around much these last years. Don't pretend now that you were close. Ethan moved on with his life. Maybe you should too." The words sliced deeper than I expected, because there was a sliver of truth in them. Yes, I hadn't been around as much, but I'd tried. God, I had tried. Every canceled visit, every unanswered call, every holiday invitation that mysteriously fell through, each one chipped away at my place in Ethan's life. "Melissa," I said, my voice breaking. "I was there when his father walked out. I was there for every school play, every scraped knee, every triumph and heartbreak. You can't erase that just because it's inconvenient for you." "I'm not erasing anything," she said flatly. "I'm just moving forward, and you should too. The funeral's over. There's nothing more to talk about." She ended the call before I could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, my hand still clutching the phone, my breath shallow. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in. She'd said it so easily, as if I'd been a footnote in my own son's life, as if the decades I'd spent raising him, sacrificing for him, meant nothing. But there was something else, something that gnawed at me. No calls, no messages, no hospital updates. If she'd truly tried to reach me, there would have been proof. I'd seen nothing. I opened my phone again, scrolling through my call log with shaking hands. Nothing from Melissa, nothing from any hospital. My number hadn't changed in years, and then it hit me. She hadn't tried. She'd never intended to call me. The decision to keep me away had been deliberate. The realization made my stomach twist. For the first time, I let myself wonder, what else had she kept from me? How long had this been going on? The kitchen seemed colder now, the morning light dimming as clouds gathered outside. I reached for the lilies, touching the petals with a tenderness I wished I'd been able to give my son in his final moments. I thought of Ethan lying in a hospital bed, perhaps asking for me, wondering why I hadn't come, believing, maybe, that I didn't care enough to be there. Melissa's voice echoed again. People who were part of Ethan's life every day. I had been there every day once, until she made sure I wasn't. And now she'd taken even the last goodbye from me. Melissa's cold dismissal kept looping in my head, but the more I replayed her words, the more I needed to prove to myself that something didn't add up. If Ethan had been in the hospital, there would be records. There had to be. I pulled my old address book from the drawer, my fingers brushing past faded notes and numbers until I found St. Mary's Hospital. It was the one Ethan had mentioned years ago when he'd had a minor surgery. I dialed, my heart thudding. St. Mary's, patient information, a polite voice answered. Yes, I'm calling about my son, Ethan Bennett. I was told he was here recently. Possibly passed away? The words tasted bitter in my mouth. There was a pause. The sound of typing on a keyboard. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any record of a patient by that name in the last 6 months. My grip on the phone tightened. That can't be right. He had surgery. His wife told me. We also don't have a Dr. Henderson on staff, the woman added gently. Are you sure you have the correct hospital? I ended the call slowly, my ears ringing. If Ethan had never been admitted there, where had he been? Had Melissa lied about the hospital entirely? The idea made my pulse quicken, not with grief this time, but with a crawling unease. A terrifying thought whispered in the back of my mind. What if he's not dead at all? The possibility was absurd, but it lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. I had to follow the next thread I could find. Peterson's funeral home. Melissa had mentioned it in passing. I called, bracing myself. Peterson Funeral Home. This is Margaret speaking. Hello, I'm calling about the service for Ethan Bennett. Oh yes, Mrs. Bennett, Margaret said brightly. Everything is arranged just as you requested. Closed casket, small service, immediate family only. Will you be bringing the flowers? I'm not Mrs. Bennett, I said slowly. I'm Clara Bennett, Ethan's mother. Silence. Then an awkward cough. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Bennett. Your daughter-in-law specifically said the guest list was finalized and no other family would be attending. I assumed. She said I wasn't coming? Margaret's voice softened. She said it would be too difficult for you, that you preferred to grieve privately. I pressed a hand to my temple. The service is Thursday at 2. Well, actually, Margaret hesitated. Mrs. Bennett called an hour ago and moved it up. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. She said she wanted to get it over with quickly. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Less than 12 hours from now, my son would be buried, and I hadn't even known when or where. My voice was flat when I asked, which cemetery? I'm sorry, she didn't give us that information. She said she'd handle the burial arrangements herself. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Melissa had changed the date, the time, the details, everything, just to ensure I wouldn't be there. And she'd succeeded. I hung up and sank into my chair, my fingers trembling around the receiver. The lilies on the counter were beginning to wilt, their fragrance heavy and cloying in the still air. Images flashed unbidden. Ethan as a boy, running across the yard with grass stains on his knees. Ethan at his high school graduation, his arm slung proudly around my shoulders. Now, the son I'd raised, the life I'd poured myself into, would be lowered into the ground without me to see him off. Anger rose first, sharp and hot. How dare she take that from me? How dare she decide I didn't deserve to say goodbye? But anger quickly gave way to something colder, heavier. Shock, laced with a grief so deep it seemed to hollow me out from the inside. I didn't even know where my son would rest. The thought struck with brutal clarity. In the morning, somewhere in this city, a grave would be filled, and I wouldn't know where to bring flowers, where to stand and speak to him in the quiet. Melissa's voice echoed again in my mind. It's better this way. less complicated. No, it wasn't better. It was cruel. And now, sitting alone in the dimming light of my kitchen, I understood something I hadn't dared to admit before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. And I was going to find out why. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat at the kitchen table long after the street outside had gone quiet, my fingers curled around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. My mind kept circling the same question. When did I start losing Ethan? It wasn't like a sudden storm that tore through without warning. It was slower than that, stealthier. A tide that had been pulling away for years until I was left standing on a dry, cracked shore. I thought back to the first time a plan had been canceled. It was just after Ethan married Melissa. I'd invited them for Sunday dinner, something we'd done regularly since he was in college. He called that morning, his voice hesitant. "Mom, Melissa's not feeling well. Can we take a rain check?" I'd been disappointed, but I'd understood. People get sick. Plans change. We rescheduled for the following week, but that week came and went without a call. The pattern repeated, subtle at first. Birthdays where my calls went to voicemail. Christmas invitations politely declined because we're spending the holidays with her family this year. Even Easter, when I suggested attending church together, was met with a gentle but firm, "Melissa already has plans." At the time, I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds have to build their own traditions. I didn't want to be the kind of mother-in-law who clung too tightly, who made her son feel torn between two women. But each year, the gap between us grew wider. I remembered one summer, 3 years ago, when I drove 3 hours to surprise Ethan for his birthday. I'd baked his favorite chocolate cake, dark, rich, the way he'd loved it since childhood. I still remember the weight of it in my arms as I knocked on their door, heart pounding with anticipation. Melissa answered. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Clara." What a surprise. "I thought I'd bring Ethan his cake," I said, stepping forward. "Oh, that's thoughtful," she said, but her eyes flicked over her shoulder. "Actually, we're just on our way out. Dinner reservations with my family. It's a small table. No room for extras." For a moment, I'd stood there holding that cake, feeling like a schoolgirl who'd crashed the wrong party. Ethan appeared in the hallway, slipping on his jacket. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Not, "I'm so glad to see you," just confusion. I told him I'd brought the cake, and he gave me a quick hug before Melissa ushered him out. That cake stayed in their refrigerator for a week before Melissa called to say it had gone stale. I never asked if Ethan had even had a slice. Then there were the little things, text messages that got shorter and less frequent. "Can't talk now. Busy, we'll call later." Sometimes there was no call at all. Holidays became minefields. I'd prepare gifts, only to be told last minute that they wouldn't be able to visit. The explanations always sounded reasonable. Melissa's sister was in town. Ethan had to work late. They'd booked a trip months ago. But over time, they began to feel less like coincidences and more like walls being quietly built between us. One winter, I caught pneumonia. I called Ethan from my hospital bed just to hear his voice. Melissa answered his phone and told me he was resting after a long shift, that she'd pass along my message. He never called back. At the time, I told myself he was busy, that I didn't want to burden him with my problems. But now, replaying it with the knowledge of what Melissa had done with the funeral, I couldn't help but wonder if he'd even known I'd called at all. Each memory was another piece of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. The truth was, I'd been erased slowly, deliberately, until there was barely a trace of me left in Ethan's life. It wasn't just that I missed milestones, it was that I'd stopped being invited to them altogether. I thought about the photos on my mantle. Ethan's college graduation, the day he bought his first car, a fishing trip we'd taken just the two of us. Those were years when I was part of every story he told, when he'd call me just to share something funny from his day. Somewhere along the line, I'd become a footnote instead. A lump rose in my throat. I told myself that love meant giving space, but now I wondered if I'd given too much, if I'd let the distance grow because I was afraid of being seen as overbearing. I pushed the cold coffee aside and stared at the dark window. My reflection stared back, older than I remembered. Lines etched deeper from years of worry I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Melissa's control over the funeral arrangements wasn't an isolated act. It was the final, brutal chapter in a book she'd been writing for years. And I, too willing to believe the excuses, had played right into her hands. The loss I felt now wasn't just for Ethan's death. It was for every moment we'd missed, every conversation stolen before it could happen, every hug that never came. And the worst part? I didn't even know how much of Ethan's absence had been his choice, or how much of it had been engineered by the woman he married. I clenched my hands in my lap. Whatever the truth was, I was going to find it. The morning after my long night at the kitchen table, I pulled out an old shoebox from the back of my closet. Inside were years' worth of cards, printed emails, and my worn leather planner. I spread them out on the table, determined to trace back the trail of absence that had led us here. I started with my phone. Years of messages from Ethan were still there, some warm and chatty, others short and distant. I scrolled back, tracing them like breadcrumbs. 3 years ago. Hey, Mom, can we reschedule dinner? Melissa's got a work thing. 2 years ago. Sorry, can't make it for Thanksgiving. We'll try Christmas. 1 year ago. Busy, we'll call soon. The tone was changing, but there was something else I hadn't noticed before. I pulled up a series of messages from about 18 months ago. The punctuation was different. Ethan always wrote Mom with a capital M, but here it was lowercase. He used to end his texts with a dash and his initial E, but these didn't have that. And the phrasing, Ethan had never once called me Clara in his life, but there it was, in black and white. Clara, we'll have to skip this weekend. My stomach tightened. I opened my leather planner, flipping through page after page. Each month was filled with small notes in my tidy handwriting. Dinner with Ethan canceled. Visit postponed. Birthday party. Moved to next week. The ink was faded in some places, but the pattern was unmistakable. Every time I tried to see my son, something intervened, and now, with fresh eyes, I saw it for what it was. Not bad luck, not life getting in the way. Something else. I dug deeper, comparing the planner dates to the text messages, and there it was, a match. On the same day I'd marked Ethan's birthday dinner, canceled, there was a text saying Melissa's family had an emergency. 2 weeks later, a note about bringing over cookies was paired with a curt, "Not a good time, we'll call you." Now. But the most chilling part was that some of these messages didn't sound like my son at all. The rhythm was wrong. Ethan had a warmth to his words, even when he was busy. These felt clipped, transactional, almost like a business email. A thought crept in, slow but persistent. What if he never wrote them? I sat back, my hands trembling. For years, I'd believed Ethan had been the one pulling away, that he'd chosen a life where I was a distant figure, an occasional holiday phone call. But what if he hadn't? What if he'd been reaching for me all along and someone else had been cutting the connection? It was almost too much to hope for, but that hope burned bright, even against the grief. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the last voicemail Ethan had left me. It was over a year old. His voice warm and a little tired, saying, "Love you, Mom. Talk soon." That was the Ethan I knew. That was my boy. The messages that came after, they didn't have that voice at all. I started stacking the planner pages and printed messages into neat piles. Canceled plans, odd texts, missed holidays. The evidence was mounting, a paper trail of absence that no longer felt like coincidence. The more I looked, the more I realized this hadn't been a slow drifting apart. It had been a theft. The ache in my chest deepened as I thought of all the moments stolen. Times Ethan might have been waiting for me to call or wondering why I hadn't come, just as I'd been wondering why he hadn't reached out. The sadness pressed heavy, dragging me down to that familiar pit of loss. But then, just as the weight threatened to crush me, the thought returned. Maybe he didn't want this distance. Maybe he fought it in ways I never knew. And with that, I felt something else. Resolve. If there was even the smallest chance Ethan had been kept from me against his will, I needed to know the truth. I had just finished sorting the last pile when my phone rang. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. When I finally picked up, her voice was nothing like the cold, composed tone I'd heard before. It was high, urgent, almost trembling. "Clara, we need to meet now." My pulse quickened. "What's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone," she said quickly. It's important. Please, today." There was a noise in the background, like something falling over. Then she lowered her voice to a whisper. "We need to talk before it's too late." Before I could respond, she ended the call. I sat there, phone in hand, my heart pounding. Melissa had been the wall between me and my son for years. Of that I was certain. But now, she sounded like someone whose own walls were starting to crack. And whatever was on the other side, I was finally ready to see it. Melissa's house looked exactly as I remembered. White siding, tidy shrubs, and a door I'd walked through fewer times than I could count. But this time, there was no air of polite exclusion. When she opened the door, she looked wrecked. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her eyes swollen, and she clutched the frame like she needed it to stand. "Come in," she murmured, stepping aside. I entered cautiously, my gaze sweeping over the living room. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, envelopes, legal forms, and what looked like bank statements. She motioned toward the couch. "Sit. I don't know where to start." "Try the truth," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Melissa flinched but nodded. She sank into the armchair opposite me, twisting a tissue in her hands. "I've been lying to you for years." The words hung between us, heavy and bitter. "I know," I said quietly. "I just don't know how much." She swallowed hard. "From the beginning of our marriage, I felt like I was competing with you. Ethan talked about you all the time, what you'd think about a decision, how you'd react to our plans. I told myself it was normal that he loved his mom, but it made me feel like there wasn't enough space for me." "So you decided to take me out of the picture?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. "I started small, suggesting we reschedule visits, telling him you were busy when you called. But then it became easier to just intercept things before he even knew. I deleted messages. I answered his phone when he wasn't home and told you he was busy. I even sent texts pretending to be him." The confirmation still stung, even after all my suspicions. "You made him think I didn't want to see him," I said, my voice trembling. "And I made you think he didn't want to see you." Her own voice cracked. "I told myself it was for the good of our marriage, but I was just selfish. I wanted him to need me more than anyone else." My hands clenched in my lap. "And Ethan? He never caught on?" She shook her head slowly. "Not until a few months ago. He started asking questions about why you didn't call for his birthday, why you never visited anymore. I had answers for everything, but he didn't believe me." I leaned forward. "What happened?" Melissa took a shuddering breath. "He hired a private investigator, went through phone records, emails. He found out everything, every message I deleted, every time I changed plans. He confronted me, and I couldn't lie anymore." I felt my throat tighten. "What did he say?" "That I'd stolen years from him, years with his mother. He was furious, Clara. And hurt. He said he couldn't stay married to someone who'd done that." The room seemed to shrink around me. I imagined Ethan, my Ethan, finally seeing the truth, the betrayal etched across his face. Melissa dabbed at her eyes with the crumpled tissue. "He went to see a lawyer. Changed his will. Left everything to you. The house, the accounts, even his life insurance. I think he planned to leave me after his surgery. My pulse thudded in my ears. So you knew he changed the will? I found out after he died, she admitted. The lawyer called me, told me I wasn't in it anymore. That's when I panicked. I thought you were behind it, that you'd taken him from me in the end. The irony nearly made me laugh, bitter and humorless. Taken him from you? Melissa, you spent years making sure I couldn't even see my own son. She didn't argue. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I can't undo it. I can't give you back the time I stole. But I thought you should know he found out. Before he died, he knew the truth, and he chose you. Those last words hit me like a wave. He chose me, not because I fought for him, but because even after all the lies, he still loved me enough to set things right. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, I stood. You're right, Melissa, you can't undo it. But you can tell me everything. Every message, every call, every visit you stopped. I want it all. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll give you whatever you need. I turned toward the door, the weight in my chest shifting. Not lighter, but different. Now I carried not just grief, but the truth. And with it, the knowledge that Ethan had tried to come back to me in the end. Melissa's confession still rang in my ears, but something in her expression told me there was more. Something she hadn't said yet. She bit her lip, twisting the damp tissue in her hands until it nearly tore. Clara, there's something else? I crossed my arms, bracing myself. What could possibly be worse than stealing years from a mother and her son? Her gaze met mine, and for the first time since I walked in, she didn't look defensive, just hollow. Do you remember last year when you had that emergency surgery? I frowned. My appendectomy, 4 days in the hospital. She nodded slowly. Ethan was your emergency contact. The hospital called him as soon as you were admitted. He left work, got in the car, and was halfway there when I called him back. I felt a chill creep up my spine. What did you tell him? That you were fine, that you'd specifically asked not to be disturbed, that your friend Margaret was with you. Her voice trembled now. I told him you didn't want him to see you. Weak. That you'd be embarrassed. My jaw clenched. I lay in that hospital bed thinking my son didn't care. And all that time, he was trying to come. Tears slid down her cheeks. He wanted to be there, Clara. Every time something happened to you, the ankle sprain, your car breaking down on the highway, the pneumonia, you didn't hear from him because I told him you didn't want him to. The air in the room seemed to thin, pressing against my ribs. I was back in that sterile hospital room, staring at the white ceiling, believing my son had chosen not to show up. That memory had stung for months. Now it burned with an entirely new kind of pain. I turned away, my hands shaking. You didn't just take him from me. You took me from him. You made him believe I didn't need him. Melissa's shoulders crumpled. I know, and I can't undo it. Her voice softened, but her next words dropped like a stone in my stomach. The night before his last surgery, he told me he was going to divorce me. I whipped my head around. What? He said he couldn't stay married to someone who'd kept him from his mother. He was going to call you after the surgery, tell you everything. He even said he wanted you at the house again, wanted you to help him sort through old family photos. The image of Ethan making that promise, of him deciding to come back to me, was almost too much. My knees weakened, and I sat heavily on the couch. He changed his will the next morning, Melissa continued, voice cracking. I think he wanted to make sure, no matter what happened, you'd be taken care of, that you'd know where his heart really was. It was too much at once, rage at what she had stolen, grief for what could have been, and a rush of fierce, aching love for the son who had tried to set things right. My emotions climbed to a breaking point, then crashed down, leaving me hollow but trembling. For a long while, we said nothing. Then Melissa cleared her throat, tentative. "Clara, I know where he's buried." The words hit me like a jolt. "You've known this whole time?" She nodded, eyes darting away. "Riverside Cemetery, Section C, Plot 247. The numbers burned into my mind instantly. I wanted to leave right then to go to my son, to kneel beside his grave and tell him everything I hadn't had the chance to say. I rose from the couch, my bag already in my hand. Then this conversation is over. But Melissa stood too, panic flashing in her eyes. "Wait, please, don't go yet. There's something else you need to know, something worse." I froze in the doorway, my hand on the frame. "Worse than all of this?" Her lips trembled. "Yes, I can't tell you here. Please come back tomorrow morning. Let me explain before you go to the cemetery." I studied her for a long, tense moment. She looked almost afraid, not just of losing me completely, but of the weight of whatever truth she was holding back. "What could possibly be more terrible than what you've already told me?" I asked, my voice low. Melissa's answer was barely a whisper. "It's about the day Ethan died, and it's not what you think." The room seemed to tilt again, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was from the creeping, dizzying sense that I'd been standing on the edge of something much darker all along. I stepped back, my resolve hardening. "Tomorrow morning," I said, 9 o'clock, "and if you try to change your story, I'll walk out and never come back." She nodded quickly, tears still streaming. "I'll tell you everything." I left without another word, but the rest of the night, sleep was impossible. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. Ethan ready to come home to me, the will, the divorce, and now, the cryptic promise of something worse. When dawn broke, I sat at my kitchen table, the address of Riverside Cemetery in one hand. Melissa's fearful eyes burned into my memory. My heart pulled me toward my son's grave, but a darker curiosity dragged me toward the truth Melissa claimed to hold. And as much as I hated to admit it, I knew which one I had to face first. The next morning, I drove to Melissa's house with the same mix of dread and determination that had kept me awake all night. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of what she was about to tell me hung over the street itself. Melissa opened the door before I even knocked. She looked smaller somehow, her posture bent inward, eyes rimmed with red. "Come in," she murmured. We sat in the living room, the same space where she'd confessed so much already. She clasped her hands together in her lap, and when she began to speak, her voice was low, almost like she was telling a secret to herself. "Before I met Ethan, I was engaged to someone else, Marcus." Her gaze flickered to me, then away again. "We were together 3 years. We planned our wedding, picked the flowers, booked the church, everything. But his mother hated me. She thought I wasn't good enough. Wrong background, wrong family, wrong everything. She worked on him for months, whispering doubts, planting little lies." Melissa's throat tightened. 3 weeks before the wedding, he called it off, said his mother convinced him I was only after his money, that I didn't really love him. I lost him because I couldn't compete with the woman who raised him. Her eyes were glassy now. "So when I met Ethan and I saw how close you two were, I panicked. I told myself I'd never let another mother take the man I loved, and that's when it started. Those little adjustments. Those reasons why you couldn't visit, the calls I didn't pass on. At first, I thought it was harmless. I thought I was just protecting my marriage. But it became control, and control became habit." I let her words settle between us. Part of me wanted to scream that her past heartbreak didn't give her the right to destroy what Ethan and I had. Another part recognized the raw fear in her eyes, the kind that comes from old wounds never healed. "You didn't just protect your marriage," I said finally. "You suffocated it. You made Ethan believe I didn't want him, and you made me believe he didn't want me." Melissa looked down at her hands. I know, and I'm sorry. It's not enough, but it's all I can give now. The silence stretched. I realized then that the rest of the truth I needed wasn't in this house. It was in the place Ethan had prepared for me, his safety deposit box. I stood. I'm going to the bank. Melissa didn't try to stop me. At First National Bank, the clerk led me to the vault room, where the air was cool and faintly metallic. My hands trembled as I slid the small brass key into box 247 and pulled it free. Inside was a manila envelope and a small velvet jewelry box. I opened the envelope first. The letters were addressed to me, each dated over the past 2 years. In the first, Ethan wrote of confusion, wondering why I'd grown so distant, questioning what he might have done wrong. The second showed suspicion, noting how Melissa always had a reason why we couldn't see each other. The last was only weeks old, filled with resolve. I'm going to find out the truth, Mom, and when I do, we'll fix this. By the time I finished reading, my hands were wet with tears. I opened the velvet box next. Inside was a silver bracelet, the one I'd given him on his 16th birthday, engraved, "My son, my pride, my joy." I'd thought it lost years ago, but he'd kept it. All this time. In that moment, I felt something shift. The pain was still there, but beneath it was something steadier, warmer, like a heartbeat returning after a long pause. I closed the box gently, knowing these were the last gifts my son had chosen for me. His words, his faith, his love, all preserved in this quiet space. Walking out of the bank, I knew the money and property he'd left me weren't the true inheritance. The real gift was knowing he'd never stopped wanting me in his life. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with the bracelet around my wrist. My fingers traced the engraving as I thought about forgiveness, not for Melissa, not yet, but for myself, for believing the lies, for not fighting harder. The decision about the estate could wait. What mattered now was that I finally had the truth, and in that truth, a chance, not to erase the years we'd lost, but to live the ones ahead without doubt. For the first time in a long while, the house felt less empty. The vault room was silent except for the faint hum of the air system, but to me it felt like the world had stopped breathing. I had already seen the bracelet, felt its weight in my palm, and let the tears fall for what it meant, that Ethan had kept a piece of me close. Even through the years, Melissa had built her walls. But when I looked deeper into the safety deposit box, my fingers brushed against something else. 3 neatly folded envelopes, each with my name written in Ethan's familiar, careful handwriting. My throat tightened. I sat down at the small table in the vault room and opened the first letter. Mom, it began, dated 18 months ago. I don't understand what happened between us. I keep thinking back, trying to find the moment things went wrong, but I can't. Melissa says you've been busy, that you don't want me underfoot. I hope that's not true. I miss our Sunday calls. I miss the way you'd always ask about my work, even when I knew you didn't understand half of what I was talking about. The words blurred as my eyes stung. I could almost hear his voice, that gentle humor underlining every sentence. I reached for the second letter, dated 8 months ago. Mom, something's not right. Every time I call you, Melissa says you're not feeling well or you're out. I've tried stopping by, but she says you've gone somewhere or you're too tired. I don't remember you ever being too tired for me. I'm starting to think she's lying, but I don't know why. I'm going to keep trying. I don't want to believe you'd shut me out. I exhaled slowly, the pain twisting into something sharper. Confirmation of what I'd suspected. Melissa hadn't just pulled me away from Ethan. She'd pulled Ethan away from me. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the third letter, dated only 6 weeks ago, just before his final surgery. Mom, I know now. She's been keeping us apart. I've seen the phone records, the messages you sent that I never got. I hired someone to help me put the pieces together. It's worse than I thought. She even told me you didn't want me at the hospital when you were sick. That almost broke me. I wanted to come. I wanted to sit with you like you did for me when I was 12 and had pneumonia. She told me you'd be embarrassed for me to see you like that." The next lines made my breath catch. "When I get through this surgery, I'm going to see you. I'm leaving her. I don't care how messy it gets. I want my mom back." The paper shook in my hands. He had been so close to walking back into my life for good. And now, that moment would never come. I looked again at the bracelet lying beside the letters. It was simple silver, a little scuffed from years of wear, the engraving still clear. My son, my pride, my joy. I remembered the day I gave it to him, his 16th birthday, his grin stretching ear to ear as he clasped it around his wrist. "I'll never take it off," he'd promised. And somehow, he hadn't. I pressed it to my lips, feeling the cool metal and imagining it warm from his skin. For the first time since I'd heard the news of his death, I felt something other than grief or anger. I felt him, his presence, his love, cutting through the lies Melissa had spun. Melissa's story earlier that morning, the broken engagement, the fear of losing another man to his mother, had briefly softened me. I could understand fear, but these letters, the bracelet, they told me that whatever her pain had been, she had chosen to pass it on to me and to Ethan. That was something I couldn't excuse. I closed the box gently, tucking the letters and the bracelet into my purse. They weren't just keepsakes. They were proof. Proof that our bond had survived even when we were forced apart. Proof that Ethan had wanted to come back to me. The walk out of the bank felt different this time. The weight in my chest was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It was solid, like a stone I could carry. At home, I made tea, the steam curling upward as I sat at the kitchen table. I spread the letters out in front of me, laying the bracelet across them. The afternoon light spilled over the silver, catching on the engraved words. I read the letters again, slowly, letting each line sink in. The first brought me down, back to the confusion and hurt Ethan had felt. The second stirred a quiet anger, the realization of how many moments had been stolen from us. The third set my heart alight with a fierce, bittersweet pride. He'd known the truth. He'd fought for it. My eyes lingered on the last sentence he'd written, "I want my mom back." I wrapped the bracelet around my wrist and fastened it. The clasp clicked shut, and something in me clicked with it. The grief was still there, but so was the knowledge that his love hadn't been erased by Melissa's control. For the first time in years, I felt steady. I sat back, my hands resting on the letters, my fingers brushing the bracelet. My gaze lifted to the window, where the light was beginning to fade into gold. The ache in my chest hadn't gone, but it had changed. It wasn't an open wound anymore. It was a scar. Tender, yes, but a reminder of survival. I knew the next steps wouldn't be easy. I would have to decide what to do with the estate, what to say to Melissa, and how to live with the years we'd lost. But for now, I let the quiet settle, because in that quiet I could hear him, and I wasn't ready to let go just yet. The law office smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, a scent I'd come to associate with final decisions. David Hartwell stood as I entered, his kind eyes searching mine for signs of hesitation. I had none. The bracelet on my wrist was a quiet anchor, the letters from Ethan a steady drumbeat in my chest. Melissa was already seated at the long conference table. She looked smaller than I remembered, her posture slumped, eyes fixed on the stack of documents in front of her. Gone was the calculated poise I'd seen so many times. In its place was a kind of wary exhaustion. David gestured for me to sit. "We're here to finalize the arrangements for Ethan's estate," he began, his voice neutral but firm. I folded my hands in my lap and took a breath. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice steady. "Melissa, you'll have the house, free and clear." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "What?" "I'm keeping none of the property for myself, but the savings, the life insurance, every dollar of cash assets. They're going into a foundation in Ethan's name. It will support programs that help children stay connected to their grandparents during divorces or family disputes. For a moment, silence hung between us. Then Melissa swallowed hard. You don't have to. This isn't for you, I cut in gently. It's for Ethan. It's for the families who might still have a chance to hold on to each other, so no one else has to lose years the way we did. David slid a thick document toward Melissa. There are conditions, he explained. Melissa's gaze flicked to mine, wary. You'll sign a statement, I said, acknowledging everything you did, intercepting messages, canceling visits, lying about my health. And you'll commit to real counseling, not just a few sessions to check a box. I want proof you're working on the reasons behind what you did. Melissa's fingers tightened around the pen. And if I don't? Then you don't get the house. My tone left no room for argument. Her eyes glistened, but she nodded. Slowly she began to sign page after page, the quiet scratch of the pen marking each admission. I watched her hand tremble, wondering if it was from shame or resentment, or maybe both. When she reached the final page, David slid a smaller envelope across the table. This is for you to keep, he said to me, a copy of the signed statement for your records. I tucked it into my purse without looking. I already knew what it said. When the paperwork was complete, Melissa sat back, her expression unreadable. Why give me the house? She asked quietly. After everything? I looked at her, really looked, at the lines of strain around her mouth, the faint shadows under her eyes. Because Ethan wouldn't have wanted you homeless, I said. He wouldn't have wanted me to destroy you. This way, you have a chance to build something better. Whether you take it is up to you. Her eyes dropped to the table. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the office clock. David began gathering the documents, but I stayed seated, my gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long slants of light across Main Street. Life was moving on, with or without us. I thought about Ethan, about his laugh, his stubborn streak, the way he'd always managed to see the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. The foundation would be a living piece of that, a quiet act of defiance against the years of manipulation, and a promise that something good would grow from the wreckage. Melissa broke the silence. Will you tell me about him? She asked hesitantly. Before I knew him. I hesitated. She had stolen so many of those memories from me, but then I remembered the last line of Ethan's final letter. Live your life, Mom. Be happy. He was curious about everything, I began slowly. When he was 4, he took apart the toaster just to see where the bread went. He played baseball all through high school, even when it meant I had to work extra shifts to pay for his gear. And he had this laugh, loud, ridiculous, impossible to resist. A faint smile ghosted across her face. He laughed like that with me too, she said softly. I nodded. Hold on to that. Remember it when things get hard. It's part of what made him who he was. We stood. I gathered my purse, feeling the weight of the bracelet against my wrist. David walked us to the door, his voice low. You've done something rare today, Mrs. Bennett. You found a way to honor your son without letting anger dictate your choices. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky a pale, endless blue. Melissa turned to me, the signed statement clutched in her hand. Thank you, she said, and for once I thought she might actually mean it. Don't thank me, I replied. Thank Ethan, this is his mercy, not mine. I walked away without looking back. The sun was warm on my face, the street alive with the sounds of ordinary life. Cars passing, laughter from a cafe, the distant bark of a dog. That evening, I lit a candle on the mantel beneath Ethan's photograph. The foundation paperwork sat beside it, ready to send off in the morning. The flame flickered, casting a soft glow over his smiling face. I hope you're proud of me, I whispered. The room was still, but I felt it, the the same steady presence I'd carried since the day I found his letters. It wrapped around me like a quiet embrace. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what had been stolen from us. I was thinking about what remained and what could still be built in his name. Melissa was gathering her papers when I reached into my tote bag. "Before you go," I said, placing a small, worn photo album on the table between us, "I want you to see this." Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me, cautious. "Open it." The leather cover creaked as she lifted it. On the first page was Ethan at 6 months old, cheeks round, eyes wide, and laughing at the camera. Melissa's lips trembled. She turned the page, Ethan on his first day of kindergarten, clutching a backpack that was almost bigger than he was. The next, him at 10, holding a trophy taller than his waist. "I want you to look at these," I said quietly, "and understand what you erased. Every memory, every story that could have been shared. You didn't just keep me from him. You kept him from knowing where he came from." Her hands shook as she turned another page. A picture of Ethan at 16, wearing the silver bracelet I now wore on my wrist. She touched the image like it might vanish. Tears began to fall, slow and unguarded. "I thought I was protecting what we had," she whispered, her voice raw. "But I see now. I took more than I ever gave." I let the silence stretch, the weight of those images doing what no argument ever could. When she finally closed the album, she didn't meet my eyes. She simply slid it back across the table like a confession. "I'll keep it," I said, tucking it back into my bag. "It's all I have left of those years." Outside, the late afternoon light was beginning to fade. Melissa walked beside me to the parking lot, her gaze fixed on the pavement. We parted without another word. That night, I sat in my kitchen with the album on the table, running my fingers over the worn cover. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I opened it. It was a single photo. Ethan, maybe in his early 30s, standing in a sunlit garden, laughing at something off camera. I'd never seen it before. In his hand, he held a framed family picture, me and him from his college graduation, his arm draped over my shoulders. Melissa's text followed. "I found this in his desk drawer. He kept it at work. I thought you should have it." The air seemed to catch in my chest. For all the years she had tried to erase me, Ethan had kept that photo close, a silent anchor to the life we'd shared. I downloaded the image and printed it, sliding it into the frame beside his letters and the candle on my mantel. Later, I stepped into the garden. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I wore my mother's ring, the silver bracelet glinting in the porch light. In one hand, I held the photo Melissa had sent. In the other, a fresh lily from the garden. I stood there for a long time, looking at his face, at the joy that no manipulation had been able to erase. The grief was still there, but it felt different now, softened by the proof that he had never truly let go. Some bonds, I thought, were stronger than lies, stronger than time. A smile tugged at my lips, not the brittle mask I'd worn for so long, but something real. Healing wasn't an instant transformation. It was a quiet, steady thing, like roots growing unseen beneath the soil. I placed the lily at the base of the garden bench, next to the spot where I often sat to drink my morning coffee. The photo stayed in my hands. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I murmured into the night. "I'm going to be okay." And for the first time in years, I believed it.